knowledge management as a discipline was hopefully to bring those forward. And unfortunately, again, in technology project management, if I go in and try to find out and be proactive, what were X number of projects that were like this one or similar, that it's experiential knowledge, it's anecdotal that comes into the project team from individual members, and it's not as, I won't say never, but it's rarely, at least in my experience, 20 plus years, carried forward in a formal manner so that you even start off a project with a task that says what were past lessons learned. So you capture them at the end of projects, but you never have that formal step in the beginning of future projects to go back and have somebody formally try to find that, or even that may know where they were, and especially now where you have so much contractor resource dedicated to doing projects on almost a one-off basis, capturing that is very difficult. And I would think that might be even harder in medical practice as well, where you might not have that line item in an activity or circumstances. You wouldn't even have something called what were lessons learned, and even less to start new projects or new initiatives that formally went back to say, okay, let's review everything that we can find about past projects. And it, maybe because it adds a lot of overhead to the initiation of a project, or it just hasn't been started, and it's been one of the areas that I thought about writing into the Project Management Institute and say, why don't I see this more often? Isn't that a good starting point, and one of those things that you don't quite get around to?
Well, I like that, Steve, because in our EMS agency, we want to kind of phase out continuous quality improvement and all that other stuff and go towards lessons learned. But we're kind of like looking backward at what already happened and then trying to integrate it into the program. But I like your comment about how do you bring the anecdote into knowledge management. And so the lessons learned initially I was thinking of until you said that was going to bring, how do I bring an event out that tells me this is where I need to do more teaching? Now I'm wondering is this is going to pick up that early herald. Somebody saw something that has never happened before but will happen in the future. How do you bring that anecdote up so that somebody may read that in our lessons learned section, say, wow, this can happen. They keep their eye out for it. Now they see it either earlier in the course of events or they'll be aware of it and ready for it when it does happen. So I kind of like that idea of bringing the anecdote into knowledge management through a lessons learned approach.
Yeah, this is Gary, and that's one of the things I was going to bring up, and I'm glad you brought it up, is the type of knowledge that we're talking about is learn and apply on your feet type knowledge. It's adjusting your program and your organization and your operations, fine-tuning it for prime level operation, if you will. And we try and document those in lessons learned, but pretty soon if your organization is really active in the lessons learned process, you end up with stacks of manuals and books and lessons learned. And when you approach, a couple of feet of this stuff, people don't look at it anymore. People don't learn from it. People push it onto a bookshelf where it can fall off in an earthquake and really hurt somebody. So I found it's a vital, and being an ex-training chief, I found it's really a vital link to have your training organization, your part of your organization responsible for training, really tightly linked to this process and tightly linked to operations, to where they're continually training and teaching and bringing up these important lessons. That really helps. But your main protection in all of this is that process of the learning organization that I talked about early on. It's got to permeate your entire organization. And your real protection is the constant self-evaluation, the constant learning from those doing the job, as well as the people doing the job, learning for those that are planning or financing or selling the operation. It's that constant learning, evaluation process that continues to protect you in spite of the direction of the program at the time. It's self-correcting continually on a real-time basis.
Gary, is there anybody in your training organization whose job is mainly to synthesize, to keep lowering the stack by going through all of the lessons learned and condensing them, or saying, or finding patterns in them, or being able to boil them down?
That was me. Now you have to ask Mark.
So I guess that the question then is it decentralized or centralized? And you talked about so it's addressing that. You know, the trigger on what constitutes or what triggers that analysis, or what for us it's easy, it seems like, on the fire side, right? Because it's an injury or it's a rare event. Structure fire, for instance, has a tailboard discussion after every structure fire, usually conducted by the duty chief, the battalion chief running the call. And as you said, Carl, they talk about, so what went like we learned, and what was a little different. What was different about this scene that was different than what you ever learned? So what triggered that was that fairly rare event, you know, the once a week structure fire, whether it's room and contents or something a little larger than that, or an injury. So where that gets to that analysis and how do we make sense of it, of course, if it leads to an injury, or we have multiple companies or multiple jurisdictions, it might get to the division chief in training who says, you know, he heard after on the tailboard session from the battalion chief who said, you know, Gary, this didn't happen, boy, but there were 4 people that thought it very well could have happened, and it didn't. And so then, you know, or it led to an injury, and then in such case he's under some specific regulations to put out a blue sheet and a green sheet and say, hey, if you don't know this right now, tomorrow you could go on it and something could seriously happen to you. So be warned. I find it interesting, and I'm intrigued with this idea of moving patients, and some of the regular events that lead to. So my partner retired out at a young age because he was moving a patient over uneven ground with a high gurney, and for years we would tell each other, boy, somebody's going to kill themselves doing this, you know, because the patient would almost fall over, just 2 of you, and you're out in the middle of the El Mirage or somewhere in the middle of the desert. And we'd say somebody's going to kill themselves doing this as you struggle and lurch to keep them from falling, or the gurney from falling. And he went out on a life, not long after that, I wasn't working with him, went out on a career-ending back injury through that same process. So I'm intrigued by this idea that some of the, perhaps some of the consequences, the real consequences are not because of that structure fire, are not because of that rescue. It's because of the daily task that we all anecdotally know that something could seriously happen or could have a significant outcome, but we don't address it. I like that angle.
Now, talking to Susan, the reason I asked you about being a nurse is you mentioned how do you get people to talk about things they have hard explaining, and to some degree, it's physicians and nurses. Part of our approach is to do that, and it's kind of odd to me sometimes. I'm not picking on you, but I have to remind myself, as a physician, I want people, encourage them to talk about these difficult items, and then I turn around to the nurse or resident or someone next to me, and I don't apply the same principles. And I may put pressure on them where they can't think. So I keep asking myself, why is it that I can't use those principles I learned in medical school and residency and my job on a patient? Why can't I use that for everyday life or for an accident investigation? The next one is, and Susan, a number of people do the EMS, I talk about knowledge. And this intrigues me because in medical knowledge, and then there's the public safety knowledge, And EMS is a synthesis of medical care and public safety care. So it's almost impossible to have an absence of a gap, because the doctors, despite what many of them think, don't have the expertise to work public safety. And public safety people, again, despite what some of the ones I know think, they're not doctors. And so it is the synthesis is a new discipline where people are coming from different sides on it. So I think EMS is definitely one area that by structure has this separation. But how do we, and that gives even more lessons learned, what Mark and Carl were just talking about, and Gary. So can we synthesize this from a body of factual knowledge into a way of thinking, a mindset, kind of like what Steve had discussed, or a structure like Randy had described?
You know, this is Susan. You know, as we're talking about this, I think about some things. There is a balance out there, because I think that you have those that are willing to talk about the situations, but then you have those that are afraid to talk because they're not encouraged. I think traditionally in EMS they are not encouraged to talk about the things, doing something that they're supposed to do, an alternate way of getting it done. So it's kind of interesting. Really brings a lot to think about. You do find them, though. You have to look for them in your system to those that are willing to talk about it. And sometimes I think you're never going to find out about their rare events.
No, I'm glad you're recognizing that. That's good. That's a good point.
I had a question back at Steve. In your 20 years, have you seen anybody who has successfully handled the problem that you described really well?
Well, when you say successfully, and I was thinking one of the other comments, since I was talking about some of the negatives of not being able to manage or not capture lessons learned, it probably comes in with senior people on a team, and there is the process of introducing a formalized risk assessment at the beginning of projects, and that's one of the elements that's required in a full-blown formal project plan, is to have a project risk register, and they mostly address what could go wrong as opposed to things that could go right or could go wrong. There's a little different character of a risk assessment, and that's kind of where I started with some of my academic research. Was in terms of risk assessments, I don't think certainly technology people do as good a job analyzing risk, because they don't have that mindset that's broad enough to encompass what risk as insurance people or healthcare professionals or other finance professionals, other disciplines really talk about risk in a different syntax and semantics and context than technical people, being very, very limited. And that's where I started getting outside the box and looking at that. And I think that's one part of it, and I don't have all the experience, but I don't think of anything off the top of my head. The only place that I see that the knowledge management being captured is to have really senior people on the staff, so they've got it in their heads, and they can see and intuitively bring those aspects to light and get those formalized into a risk management plan, and bring those caveats, and also, we've done this 100 times. This always works, even though the book doesn't say so, and that's where they get the friction with the formal knowledge as opposed to informal experiential. Comes in through the human component with seasoned team members, as opposed to the formalized knowledge management plans. It's not to say they're not out there, but my exposure to knowledge management and to captures has not been as positive as I would have liked, because I have gone looking for it as a lead and a project manager. Where are all the projects we've done before, and where can I get those lessons learned? And it's very difficult to extract. So I haven't seen what I would say was a raving success as the gold standard for being able to do that. And that's what led me into researching it, certainly from a myopic technology view in in my experience, it just isn't out there. And there are, lots of great materials on NIST, like the NIST 800, SP 800-37 and 39 series of documents really talk about risk assessments and talk about it in great language for technical professionals as well as general, but it's not captured in the best way. They think about risk in terms of what could go wrong and what could derail the project, and it's really too narrow, and it needs to be broader. So the short answer to your question is I haven't seen what I think is the gold standard for capturing it and being able to do it. And having tried to do it, it's very difficult. It's really the anecdotal inputs from senior team members with a wide range of experience that captures that in an informal way.
See, I think you really made a key point when you talked or located it on senior people, because a lot of the lessons learned stuff or the after-action reviews that I've run into are really geared more to people on the front line. And if it's in fact true, and it makes good sense, that it's really the senior people who are the continuity from episode to episode or project to project, then I think a lot of the attention is being directed at the wrong place. And senior people are pretty well overloaded already. So I think just a focus on them and how would they be in a better position to give continuity over time or continue moving a lesson from one setting to another setting is a valuable insight.
I agree with you, Carl. We really live in a concerning time, and I suppose all of us older people say that over the generations, but so much was dependent upon those senior people, and today's siloing of industries due to specialization, our contracting out of things, our vast segment of employees that are retiring out and the senior knowledge being lost. A lot of this knowledge is not being transitioned. It's not being, if it's documented, it's buried in lessons learned under piles of books. It's not being churned around the organization and across organizational boundaries and contractual boundaries between master companies and their contractors. There's no active churning of this knowledge, developing the knowledge or passing it along. And I'm afraid we're going to see some not so nice things happen in the future.
Carl and Steve, I like that because we're trying, like I said, move our quality improvement program over towards a lessons learned approach. And Carl, you're right. We keep thinking of how we're going to help the guy in the street do better care, and yet the one who provides continuity and overlay is the middle management, upper management, which we're not targeting. So I'm going to talk to Laura, who's working on this with me, about whether we make it two-layered or we talk to the guy from the street through the management. But that's something that we just haven't discussed. That the lessons learned, we tend to think of those for, and CQI, for the person, operator doing the job, rather than the management people or administrators.
Can I ask, to me, lessons learned as far as quality improvement goes is kind of like root cause analysis. Is it similar or dissimilar?
What's that, Chris?
Well, I come from a risk management background, and lessons learned is really feedback. As the chief said, the tailboard thing that, in the immediate situation, whereas root cause analysis tends to be much deeper. Root cause analysis comes from system safety, which was developed for aerospace, and depending on what's involved, the root cause analysis for the shuttle crash or when the rocket motor blew up and the shuttle went in the ocean ran over 500 pages. And you certainly don't want to do 500 pages of root cause analysis on, there was something that was what the flying people call a near miss. It could have happened. Somebody could have gotten injured. There could have been damage to equipment. You don't want to do real in-depth root cause analysis on that. So quality improvement based on feedback is going to be, somebody still has got to do what Carl asked Gary about, and that's the synthesizing. Somebody's got to look at, over time, the accumulation of all this feedback and say, okay, these were similar situations and this was similar feedback, so now we've got this bundle of feedback that fits similar situations. Now you've got a learning tool.
Thank you.
I think
so often some of those things are systematic too. So
right.
If you start chasing the system problems that allow this stuff to happen, you catch many more specific problems all at once.
I think another simple difference is just that we usually talk about lessons learned plural, lessons, but we talk about root cause singular, and I don't think anything is pretty much nailed down to a single cause, so I would lean toward lessons learned just as reflecting more of the complexity of a situation than trying to boil down or drive back to some kind of root cause.
Yeah, root cause tends to say what happened, but it doesn't delve historically, and they're trying to change that into much more of the how or why did it happen, what were they thinking, like Dave says, put yourself in their place to understand how the system and the people within that system could have gotten into that situation and go after those challenges.
Yeah, that's the process tends to go to the whys, and for years we've talked about 5 whys, but now there's a discussion in the risk management community about not stopping after 5, but doing 6 or 7, because you're not getting to true causes with the 5 whys.
Right.
Too often we're only getting to the supervisory level or the first manager level and not systemic stuff that Gary talked about.
So I'm stuck on this idea that I have workers' comp injuries at a level that I've never had in the 3 years I've been doing this, the 3 years. None of them were done by fireballs, structure fires, rescues, the sexy, spectacular. It was the routine movement of patients. It was the routine conducting of chores around the station. It was the routine physical fitness. And so as a fire chief, I'm stuck on this idea that that's not what causes, that's not what's creating heartache for me right now. And quite honestly, the organization, it's the things that I don't learn from or look to learn from that don't involve fire or newscasts. And so I get back, I think it was you, Susan, that started talking we were talking about the movement of patients or the interaction and the daily interaction of some of these things that I'm struck now that I don't ever learn lessons from any of those, and I'm not even interested in it, and I should be.
Is there literature out there to show a link between employee satisfaction and workman comp injuries?
I bet you there is.
Why did you say that after I talked?
No, I'm just curious.
Everybody is wishing there was, and they wish they knew where it was. I don't know of any something to look into, though. I'd be curious.
Married to one of my firefighters.
Well, we're at 1 more minute, and I got some ideas for more calls on this. Reproduce it. Sometimes these slow to start calls turn out to be very intriguing to me, and I learn different approaches I hadn't thought of before. One of them is how to apply the lessons learned, how to translate that, the bulk of that into some kind of a system-wide approach, and also how to bring it into upper management who, my experience, doesn't need to learn because they know it. That's how they got there. So how do we break through that obstacle? Any last comments in the last 1 minute of the call? Anybody who didn't get a chance to speak up, or those who did want to change their vote?
Thank you so much for letting me participate.
Oh, no, it's
been
a pleasure.
Very interesting.
Thank you for allowing us into your phone. Okay. Well, thanks very much. And let me see, the next call, July 4th, is the weekend, is a holiday. For those of you who are calling from outside the country, or I'll put that in the notes, I think we probably won't have it July 4th, but we'll do it the following 2 weeks after the 4th. So we'll skip that one, unless somebody really wants to come in on their holiday and use the phone.
Every day's a holiday for me. I'm on work.
Yeah, Gary. Yeah, Gary's workman cut. That must have been a faked injury. He faked his triple bypass. Quadruple. Okay. So, well, thanks very much, everybody, for the call.
Thank you. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Bye.
Who's still there?
Oh. Well, thank you.
Yeah, we actually got EMS onto the patch. You're wondering how long that would be, huh? How are you?
Anybody still on?
Yeah, Carl's still on.
Okay, good. Anybody else? Oh, well, Carl, we've I've had quite a past couple months. Just to let you know, though, my car thing did get resolved. I talked to a super manager, and the $2,000 that the junior guy was trying to keep me from being paid, they're going to pay the $2,000.
Fair enough. Good.
So that's one more.
We win.
That's one more check off my list of all the stuff that happened to me the past 2 months.
Now, if you can only get internet.
Yeah. Oh gosh.
Have you got closure now on the Texas stuff?
Not the closure I wanted. The second in command, right underneath the president, I got a note at the beginning that they are going to send a partial check out Monday, and no word at all for 3 days. And suddenly he sent an email to every speaker and said, "I'm giving Dave enough money to pay you guys."
You're kidding.
And I got that as part of the bulk mail. And I was trying to tell them that by doing that, I have to pay state tax money because of the way our corporate is set up, plus wire money. It's going to cost me almost $2,000 to pay everybody. And they're refusing to pay anything else. They said they lost a lot of money, and I should be happy. And I've lost probably $15,000-$16,000. But they lost money too, and so sorry.
Well, somehow you got to get this behind you.
Well, at first I was kind of angry, but you're right. It's a loss. And the other side, the freedom is my brain is now working, and I've been able to. It's no longer a struggle to write. The past couple of days, I've gotten more of my ideas out onto that paper I want to get to you. So it's it's just a loss, and we're going to move on. And but it underscores the fact that I need to get this stuff written. The stuff we're learning on the phone calls, I need to put in some kind of a form on the internet and in a published article.
Sure.
So yeah, it's done.
Well, I just wanted to touch base, be sure you're doing okay, and I learned quite a bit from the call today, even though it was just a few people.
Yeah, I know. That always surprises me. When I was on rounds, it was funny because when the fewest number of patients, my rounds were the longest because people start asking questions because there's no pressure.
Exactly.
And then I started learning about what they wanted to learn, and then through discussion, I could develop the idea better with that immediate feedback, because it became not a teaching passive thing, but an actual discussion. Their brains were relaxed enough to talk and think and respond to mine. And it was actually, that was when I got the most complaints about my long rounds, and yet the residents kept asking questions. So.
Oh, I believe it.
So yeah, this is good. But no, it's all behind me, and Feb and I are starting to relax now. That's even though we didn't like the answer, but it's done.
Sure.
It's over. We're going to move forward, and Feb pointed out, we really need to get the articles written and focus on that. I used to be able to write an article within a month, and just all this crap going on the past few months, it's just been hard to get even in some time to where my brain was loose enough to write. So it's all going away.
Remember, it takes longer to write shorter articles.
Yeah.
Don't hold yourself to the 1 month.
Well, that was back when I would have the data, I would kind of collect it, and I had my literature down. And so it'd be like a focused case report or an article of data that it kind of flowed fairly easy.
Yeah, that would, sure.
Yeah, but now it's more difficult. But I am getting it laid out, so I've got some structure to what I want to write.
Fine.
I'm basically looking at the kind of person who is looking for structure, rule-based approach, and then there's the other kind of person who, I don't want to use the word kinesthetic learner, but they're the ones who, engagement-based approach, where they learn what works by interacting with the environment. So they, knowledge to them is how responsive things are, what they do in the immediate feedback. Knowledge to the first group is what's the published research, what's the rules, what does the structure say? And I'm seeing that's some of the dividing point between who I encounter, that I get along with, and who I have difficulty with in this field. And I think that brings up what HRO is. It's that ability to interact with the environment and change the environment by becoming part of the problem and situation.
Yeah.
And then HRO, to those people, is a natural thing. They just understand what I'm talking about. And the other group never gets it because they keep, and I had that discussion actually an hour and a half with the group. They could not figure out, they kept wanting to know the rules I was going to be changing, the diseases I would be looking at. And I was trying to get across to them we weren't going to do it that way. But they kept coming back to the structure.
Yeah.
So.
Well, I'm going to have to run, but I thought it was an interesting call, and it really picked up some momentum as we went along, and so you should feel good about it.
No, I do. Everything's kind of coming up better now.
Fair enough.
And if you're in the area, let us know. We'll help you.
Sure. Well, have a good weekend for now.
Okay, you too.
Take care, fellas.
Bye-bye.
Anybody else on? If you are, we're going to start talking about you. Nobody? Okay, bye-bye. Told you I'm still on.
No, you hang up. No, you hang up.
You hang up. You hang up first.
No, I love you.